This one was requested by Eastern Outdoor Adventures, who asked if we can learn about the Sweeney Bottling Works in Middletown, New York, on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. Our story starts with Daniel Berkman Sweeney, who was born in October 1864 in New York. His parents were born in Ireland. Here's another one of those families where they're all named the same names over and over again, making for very interesting research. For instance, here's Daniel. His dad's name is Miles. His brother is also named Miles. And then later on, his son is named Miles. So when a Miles Sweeney pops up, it takes extra time to determine which one they're talking about. Okay, so let's get started with the first thing that I found. Here's an ad in the paper in 1893 that says Smith & Sweeney's Steam Bottling Works. Now the trouble with this one is I can't confirm that Daniel is involved with this. His dad's a blacksmith, so I don't think he's involved. And there's no city directories for this town between 1876 and 1905. So I can't look them up there to determine who this Smith and this Sweeney are. It's very possible that it is this family. And there were a bunch of these ads run through the year 1893, but there wasn't any other years that it was run. We can see the 1900 census, and by then it does show that Daniel is a bottler of soft drinks. In the 1905 directory, we see Sweeney Bottling Works, and Daniel is running it. There is a George here who's a bartender. Joseph, who's a bottler as well, and I know Joseph is his brother, but I'm not sure if George is. By the way, Bridget and Margaret here are his sisters. Now the 1910 directory shows Daniel still in the bottling business, and Daniel's oldest son, Miles, is now 17, and I believe this Miles is probably him working with his dad. The other Miles is probably Daniel's brother. Now this ad says Sweeney's Sparkling Soda and Mineral Waters. Nothing's changed 5 years later in the 1915 directory, but notice it says corner of Prince and Montgomery Streets in Middletown. And right now, this is the only building on that corner that isn't a house. Or maybe it is a house. The bottom half of the building looks like it could be from that period, and the top looks newer. So 1915 looks like Daniel has decided to change his career. We just saw him in the directory in the bottling. But in the state census, which was probably a little later in the year, it shows Daniel has become a postmaster. And we see his brother Joseph is his neighbor, and it lists him as a soda water manufacturer. The following year in the paper, Daniel is regarded as Postmaster Daniel B. Sweeney. Here's another one. In 1918, Sweeney Bottling Works is mentioned in the papers. Now this 1920 is hard to read, but Daniel is listed as postmaster. His son Miles is listed as manager in the bottling works, and his other son Charles is listed as assistant manager with the bottling works. In 1923, Daniel died at the age of 56. This actually doesn't even mention him being in the bottling business, just mentions him as postmaster, which he had been for about 8 years now. I tried to find him on the Find a Grave website like I normally do, but I found this, and it says his burial location is unknown. Now this 1925 directory shows that Daniel Jr. and Miles are actually running the bottling works now. Same with 1930. And it's still going in 1935. And this one lists their wives. The boys would be in their 30s by now. They did run some ads in the 30s. Here's one from 1936. Here's one from 1938. Here's 1940. And here's 1941. The last date that they ran an ad was 1945. So here's the 1945 directory. Daniel Jr. and Miles are listed, but their mom Mary is also listed as running the business. I wonder if she was all along. This says they're now distributing Budweiser and Rupert beers and manufacturers and bottlers of high-grade carbonated beverages. The same location. Miles is also listed down here as first president of Middletown Savings Bank, as well as the Sweeney Bottling Works. Now Daniel Jr. and Miles both died in 1953. Daniel was only 52, Miles was 60, and I couldn't find anything in the paper for either of their deaths. So let's skip ahead a few years to 1955. Now there's George A. and Daniel Bradley Sweeney running the business. George is Miles and Daniel's little brother. He'd be about 45 now. And Daniel Bradley is Miles' son, who's about 28 now. Now this also mentions that they manufacture Sweeney beverages and heads up distributors of Budweiser and Knickerbocker beer. Same in 1960. I found an article in the paper about Miles' son, Daniel Bradley, this guy, and there was an event where students who were interested in politics could run the city for a day, and here's young Daniel on the left. Now, unfortunately, Sweeney Bottling Works isn't mentioned in the paper after the 1950s, but we know that they're still running in 1960. I tried finding any articles that I could find for Daniel Bradley Sweeney or George, but nothing turns up for them. No obituaries, nothing. I just found George's resting place. Now, the city directories stop at 1960, so I have no idea how long these guys stayed in business. And you would think that the paper would mention something about the business shutting down or what they might have done with that old building, but my research dead ends at 1960. Eastern Outdoor Adventures mentions this is a well-known bottler in the area, and here are a few examples that I found online of the Sweeney bottles. So if that first Sweeney ad that we found was our Sweeney, then this company began in the 1890s, and it ran past 1960. Maybe some of you locals can narrow the closing date down a little bit better. But that'll do it for me for today's episode. Just let me know if there's a company you want me to research. And until then, have a great day, guys. And thanks for watching.